With the World Cup wrapped up, a lot of American fans were left asking themselves, should I begin watching soccer? Should I get back into this when the Premier League comes back in August? And I'm here to tell you, yes, like we have in our other episodes of EPL Passport, your guide to joining into Premier League fandom or one of the other leagues if you would like. And we're going to kind of get into some of the other leagues. On this week's episode, we're going to go over the rest of the questions and confusion that you might have as an American fan about the things, how things work over there in European soccer. I got my man over here. It'd take me a long time to list all of the credentials. He's like a rocket scientist. He's a teacher. He's accredited in all these different sciences and built biochemical solutions to problems in the world. He's the man himself. My man Gareth is with me for this one. We're going to go over extra time, relegation, the scoring table, and then probably on the next episode, we're going to give him a chance to talk about his favorite club and what goes along with it. It's a little tiny soccer outfit that you may or may not have heard of, Liverpool. We're going to be talking about that one probably on the next episode. We'll see how long this one goes. All right, I think the one we're going to talk about first is the thing that fried the most American minds over the World Cup. It was a struggle for a lot of people, and I don't know if some of them are ever going to get. So for me, I've been a fan of EPL for 3 years now. I play the hell out of the game. Funny enough, as I hear from so many international people who come to play in the NFL, really my understanding of the game kind of came through playing the video game and just experiencing these things day in and day out. I don't know if the American mind is ever going to fully wrap their head around extra time, because it also used to mess with my head too. And the thing I think I can communicate with American fans, and maybe this is like the best they're going to be able to do, is you just got to accept it for what it is, and then just roll with it. So extra time basically is at the end of the game. The referees will add on extra time that was burned off by the running clock rolling through celebrations, reviews, injuries, all those types of things. When injuries happen in soccer, unlike in American sports, we don't stop the game for an hour to take care of somebody. A lot of the time, the ball keeps rolling while the guy is laying there, writhing in pain, which I always find hilarious and almost a very Americanized type thing. It's funny that we're the ones that stop the game and react with all this shock when somebody twists their ankle, but over there it's like, no, ball keeps rolling, everybody's still playing around this guy. So extra time gets added to the end of the game to make up for all of the time lost throughout the game on things like that. I think the biggest thing, and something that I feel like I still haven't gotten a definitive answer on, so I'm excited to ask you this. Is there a guy timing this every single time? Or are the referees just it was a little, it was a middle amount, or it was a lot? So it was a lot, so we'll give him 10 minutes. It wasn't that much, so we'll give him 5 minutes. Or is there somebody precisely hit? Because that's how it would be in American sport, I guarantee you. It would be somebody would hit a stopwatch the instant the whatever condition started, and they would be keeping track of it throughout the game. And that is the exact amount of time you would get added at the end. Where, to the American mind, to my view, it's kind of just relying on the refs and being like, well, there was a lot of fucking around, so 10 minutes, here you go. It seems very imprecise, and that is a big time struggle for an American mind to comprehend. So tell me, is it kind of generalized, or is there someone literally measuring it to the second before that decision is made at the end of the game?
So, two things. Firstly, we've got to be careful, because extra time is not what we would call this. Extra time is like the tiebreaker time at the end of the game.
Okay, so overtime is what we would call, yeah.
So yeah, extra time is like what you guys would call overtime or whatever. When the game's a draw and it needs to be a winner, that's extra time, extra half an hour. That's like a totally different thing. What we're discussing here is added time or injury time. I think added time is the official name, but everyone pretty much calls it injury time because it's for injuries predominantly. In terms of how it's timed, the referee wears 2 watches usually, and they'll stop one when there's a stoppage for injuries, celebrations, also like substitutions. Now, back in the day, it used to be that substitutions were just 30 seconds, just counted as 30 seconds no matter what. And what teams would do in that case is if they wanted to waste time, they'd make sure the guy was like on the other side of the pitch. His number goes up, he goes around, he shakes the referee's hand, he takes his sweet time to get off the pitch. And obviously that would just count as 30 seconds. But now I think they're all just stopped. The referee stops it on the watch. I think one of the things that people sort of watching the game, obviously the guy comes on with the 4th official comes on with the board with the time on at 90 minutes or 89 minutes or something like that. I think a lot of people perceive that is that guy who's been doing the timing, but it's not. The referee has told him how much to do, how much to put on the board, and that's for the benefit of the coaching staff and the players and the fans. It's not for the referee. The referee is the person who said how long it is. So yeah, the referee times it. And there are a few times where you're like, this doesn't seem very plausible, the amount of time that's been added on. And I would say there has been a real, since the last World Cup, the World Cup in 2022, whenever World Cups happen, there's always like a bit of, I don't know, like sort of jiggery-pokery with the rules. That's when the major rule changes tend to happen in football. And at the last World Cup in 2022, they started adding on a lot more time. Now, the cynic in me would suggest that this is possibly in order to start bringing timeouts and stuff like that in the distant future, but I don't think it is, or I hope it isn't, I should say. But I think the reason they started to do this was because increasingly over the last few years, a lot of teams have kind of their tactic has been to waste a lot of time, and you know they get a narrow win, waste a lot of time. Arsenal, who won the Premier League, the EPL last year, they were notorious for kind of, you know, someone goes down injured, goalkeeper goes down injured, everyone can just have a chat for a minute whilst that gets looked into. This World Cup, actually, they tried to reduce a lot of that because they made a rule that if you go down, if your physio comes on, you have to go off. Yeah, that's never happened before, and that was a great sort of one of the great successes of this World Cup, in my opinion, that it kind of kept the game flowing. You got a lot less of that, which is definitely a criticism I've heard of football from like kind of non-football fans at all before, of like people rolling around on the floor, wasting time, crying, all that sort of stuff. I think like they're trying to minimize that with this rule change. But yeah, so to answer your question in a nutshell, it's the referee who times it. They usually wear 2 watches, and they usually stop the watch when it's one of those things. It's not every time the ball goes out of play. And that's like, I think that's something that's quite hard to get your head around. The ball is in play for about 60 minutes in a normal professional football game, give or take 5 or 10 minutes either side. But you'd never ever add on 30 minutes at the end. So it's essentially, it's the big things that disrupt the flow of the game. It's not the ball going out for a throw in, but it is, for example, someone's injured, you know, someone's, you know, disputing, arguing with the referee about a decision or something like that. All that kind of time gets added on, but the general sort of the ball's just over the line, not in play. That doesn't stop the clock.
So 2 things. One, we could never in America. You could never put this into like the NFL because you know, you're stopping the clock for celebrations. You know, here if you celebrate for too long, you get a penalty for delay of game, for delaying the game. Over there, you know, they're stopping the clock during the celebration. If you did that in the NFL, you'd get like a full Michael Jackson music video dance routine at the end of every touchdown. We can't have that. My other question is, so the time that the referee is keeping track of, does that get rounded up then? Because obviously it doesn't end right at 5 minutes or right at 2 minutes or right at 6 minutes.
That's a really good question. Yeah, I think it just gets rounded to the nearest minute. And you'll notice as well, the referee often, the game will rarely stop bang on, say it's 5 minutes added on. It won't stop on 95 minutes. It'll usually start. Basically what that means is that's the minimum amount of time. So it might end on 9 minutes, 20 seconds. And usually there's something that happens. not 95 minutes and 20 seconds, something like that. And usually that's the sort of thing that you there's usually something that happens in that 5 minutes that also might extend the game somewhat. There's usually substitutions made in that time, especially by a team who's narrowly winning, because it just wastes a bit of time and it disrupts the flow of the game and stops the momentum of the other team a bit. So yeah, like I think it must be rounded down actually, because that is the minimum amount of time, the time that goes up on the board. And sometimes you'll see it just ends like 2 seconds after that time. Other times it might go on for a bit longer. And obviously, if there's a goal or something, it can actually go on for minutes longer. I think the latest ever goal in the Premier League was scored in the 102nd or 103rd minute, something like that, which is obviously significantly after the game. Yeah, and in that game, it was a Liverpool game against Arsenal. I think there was a big injury which made it go on late, and then that goal I think was a penalty, or there was some sort of controversy. I can't remember exactly what it was, but basically that's why the game ended up being so long. And so yeah, I mean that time is a minimum time, so I'd imagine it's rounded down from what the referee has kind of stopped on his watch. But obviously he will then probably add on an extra 30 seconds, 40 seconds himself. Or herself, I should say, in the game afterwards. Yeah. And in terms of the celebrations, there are rules about celebrations. So you're not allowed to take your shirt off. That's a yellow card straight away if you take your shirt off. But actually, the rule is if you incite the crowd, and taking your shirt off is deemed as just inciting the crowd no matter what. But if you jump in the crowd or you do anything like that, you will get booked for that. But and there are several players who've been sent off because it's their second yellow for doing that in history, which is obviously pretty unwise. But yeah, no, it celebrations can get ridiculous sometimes, definitely, as a result of this.
You just brought up something that Gary's talking yourself into more work. That's what people who are good at the job does. You brought up something that we should probably do real quick because I don't know how many of these episodes. I think we're gonna have one more before the actual season starts after the Liverpool episode. I think everybody kind of got it, but yellow cards and red cards. So kind of like fouls over here in the NBA or in the NFL, or like in the NBA because they can build up and get you kicked out of the game. The difference is you can get called for a red or a flagrant, without building up the rest of them. You can just get called for a red.
Yeah.
And the difference is, and tell me if I'm misunderstanding this, because I feel like sometimes maybe it is and maybe it isn't. When this is the crazy part, the difference between, because I was talking to our good buddy Johnny about this when we were watching hockey, and somebody got sent off the rink, and that's called a power play in hockey, where you're playing 10 against 11. But in soccer, when somebody gets sent off for a red, they don't come back. The other team is just playing by a man down for the rest of the game, and it's a huge advantage. Yellow card and red cards, getting sent off, man down real quick.
Yeah, sure. So basically, there are types of 3 levels of foul in football. There's just fouls, which are not sort of cumulatively, they're not punished as such, except with a free kick. So they would be your sort of just rash challenge or slightly late or something like that, accidental handball, that kind of thing. Those things would just stop the play and give the ball back to the other team, essentially. The next level is your yellow card fouls, and these tend to be slightly more dangerous or slightly more reckless, or for things like persistent fouling. You can also get yellow cards for if you disagree with the ref and you shout at him or something like that, you can get a yellow card for that. So those that are wasting time, you can also get a yellow card for. So, for example, if you hold on to the ball, if the goalkeeper holds on to the ball for ages and refuses to kick it, you'll get booked for that. Or he takes too long to take a goal kick or something. Red cards then, so you can either get a red card for 2 yellow cards, which is just, as we've discussed, sort of any of those things that we've said. You do it twice, basically, and it doesn't have to be the same thing. So, for example, you get a yellow card for time wasting, and then later on, when you argue with the ref about that, you can get another yellow card for arguing with the ref, and that's a red card, and off you go. For straight red cards, there's three sort of two real categories. One is dangerous play, and that is essentially if you do something called, if you tackle someone and if your tackle is out of control, so if your feet are off the ground, because obviously you can't control your motion in that case, that's a red card. Or if you hit someone really hard on the shin or the leg or the upper or the ankle, something like that, something that might break someone's leg, basically, that'll be a red card. But more common red cards are for something called professional fouls, or the official referee term is denying an obvious goal scoring opportunity. So that'll be, for example, if you've got an attacker, he runs past all but one of the defenders, he's going to be through on goal. If that defender fouls him, even if it's a very innocuous foul that wouldn't be a yellow card even elsewhere on the pitch, because they've stopped that player being able to score, that is a red card. And so the player, basically, the easy way of thinking, right, is if it's the last defender fouls someone, the last defender before the goal fouls someone, it's usually a red card. However, if the player's going away from goal or something like that, there's like technicalities where it's not that. But basically, if you foul someone when they were likely to score, you get sent off. Yeah. And then getting sent off, it's actually quite surprising, like the statistics on it, that the team who go down to 10 tend to then become very, very, very compact and defensive, because just from a fitness point of view, it's very, very difficult to move around if you've got much smaller. If you've got a much smaller team relatively. So what they tend to do is they'll tend to take off an attacking player and replace whoever's been sent off with a substitute. And that means that they tend to then sit very, very deep. They often are quite hard to score against, the teams who've lost a man. They don't score very often because they're not playing attackingly, but they tend to play far more conservatively. So actually, I wouldn't say it's harder to beat an opponent that's got one fewer player, but they're not going to win, but they can be very hard to beat, if you see what I mean, because they kind of lock down. I mean, that's not true universally, and obviously if they really need to win, they'll still go for it. But if it's a league game where a draw is better than a loss, or significantly better than a loss, then they will do that. Then they will sit back, they'll sit deep. And so it's not as much of an advantage as it might be in hockey, for example. I think also because there's 11 players versus 10, percentage wise, that's very different to 5 versus 6 or whatever it is in hockey. And I think as a result of that, but when teams start to go down to 9 men, if they've got another person sent off, that's when it just becomes absolutely unassailable, basically. And usually the results complete washout at that point, and it'll be a big win to the other team. But at 10, they can go defensive and kind of keep it going, and particularly if they've got an attacking player who what we call hold the ball up. So basically, you get the ball up to them, even though there's no one else there, they can just keep the ball without getting tackled or whatever. Those kinds of players are very useful to have in that situation, and often they will also be brought on if that's necessary from the bench. Now,
what a great segue, talking about how ties are better than losses in league and that sort of thing. Because another thing we're going to talk about is both the scoring table and relegation. Our other two big learning topics. The scoring table and the way the standings work over in the EPL is interesting, very non-American, but still cool, because we talk about it all the time over here in our stuff about how you want to make every game matter in the regular season. You don't want to dilute the regular season, and EPL has a really long, it goes from the end of August to into April, depending on how things are shaken out in the leagues. And the way that they do that is a scoring system in their standings, and also relegation at the bottom of their standings. So on the prior episode with Roy, we talked about the table, basically the list of teams and where their standings are. And now, we talk about league table scoring. So I'm probably missing a part of this. I'm going off of memory from the last time I played the game, but I believe a win is worth 3. A tie is worth is it worth anything?
1.
It's worth 1. Okay, a tie is worth 1, and a loss is nothing, right?
Yes, correct. Yeah.
So a loss worth 0 points, a tie is worth 1 point, and a win is worth 3. So what this does throughout the season is it introduces an element of every game matters, right? Because if you're in the lead and you're accepting ties, you can get caught by a team who's getting wins, who are getting 3. On the other side, losses. What I've experienced with playing the game in the standings is basically if you jump out to a big lead, like if you go undefeated through September into October, it's extremely difficult to catch you. And on the other end, if you are in about 5th place, even just 5th place or 6th place, by the time like the new year hits, there's a pretty good chance you're not coming back. Like it would be very, very difficult to come back. And then in the end, we have our bottom 3 teams who are in danger of relegation. Mm-hmm. Now, this is going to take a little bit of a minute, a little bit of a nuance, because there is not anything comparable in American sports to this. So the thing I can only ask for people who are listening to this, if you watch the NBA, think of the league in Australia where all the prospects coming from, or the league in Germany. That's like whatever you consider the next tier down from the NBA. For the NFL, it would be the CFL and the UFL. In college football, it would be, D1 and D2. Essentially in Europe, there are, just in England, there are 3 leagues below the EPL. So we're talking like 4 total here. And if you're in the bottom 3 of the standings, you get sent to one of those leagues. And the top 3, there's a few different tiebreakers. I know recently they were playing like play-in games in the next league down from the EPL between the top 4 teams to who actually gets to go up to the Premier League, and you had to win your way into it. Like the standings weren't enough to automatically put you there. But so the equivalent here, everybody, think of the top 3 teams that are drafted in the NFL draft. It's funny, I can't remember who went number 1, but like the Jets, the Raiders, they wouldn't be rewarded with at the top of the draft. They would go to the UFL or the CFL. And in this past season, so it was the DC Defenders and the Louisville Kings who were in the championship game of the UFL. They would go up to the NFL the next season. And you would also get all of the financial repercussions of these things happening. So it would be a massive windfall for, Louisville Kings and the DC Defenders to go up to the NFL and get that revenue share and have access to those players. And it would be a fucking Independence Day, annihilation level event for the Raiders and the Jets to go down to the UFL. I don't think it's because, like I said, there really is no comparison to this in the U.S., so I don't think the gap is nearly that wide, but it is still, if you're one of the, and we talked about this a little bit in the last episode, if you're one of like the really big rich clubs, this is a fucking disaster, both in how embarrassing it is because you should never be in that situation, and also because the financial impact, you're going to desperately struggle to keep your players, to keep your program in the position that it's supposed to be in. Imagine if, the Raiders or the Jets went down to the UFL and now you're dealing with they wouldn't be able to keep any players because the minimum, the max salary in the UFL is not even half of what the minimum salary in the NFL is. Again, it's not that big of a gap in the it's called Champion League, right?
Championship.
Yeah. EFL Championship. There isn't that much of a difference between the Championship and the EPL, but there is a big difference, and it is a huge deal. And one of the big storylines of the season last year, usually there's a couple of different real big storylines in the EPL. Who's going to win the thing, obviously, but also which teams are going to be threatened with relegation going down to the next league. And the big storyline last year was Tottenham Hotspur, who is one of the most historic franchises, is one of the, by far the richest franchise, was in very serious danger of relegation right up until like the last 3 weeks of the season. And some people were like pretty giddy about what level, because we had never like, well, I don't know, never. Obviously, you know a lot more about it than me, but there hadn't been anything like that in like the modern era of football, of European football, where a team that big was in danger of being relegated. So the point scoring system, that's why it's important. It's where it comes into play, is both, you know, you want to win the championship, obviously the top teams, but also if you fall into that bottom three, it's a disaster. And pretty much everybody's, you know, we talk about this here on a lot. The European society is just in general a lot more of a polite society. But even in that scenario, like everybody's getting fired. In America, if like the Raiders or the Jets lost enough to be relegated to the UFL, there'd be like generations of people getting fired. Like not only is the coaching and the GM staff getting fired, but your children's children are also fired from ever working in the NFL. That's how monumentally devastating this would be. It's not quite there, but it's pretty damn close over in the EPL. Fill me in on the scoring table and relegation.
Okay, so I'll start with the table. I think it's just the easiest kind of. So basically, as you said correctly, 3 points for a win, 1 point for a draw, no points for a loss, and you kind of historically you can. There are, you know, obviously every season is different, and it's a league, and whoever has the most points is at the top, and whoever has the least points is at the bottom. But historically, you could say that for teams at the top, you know, you're looking at probably to win the league, you're looking at kind of 90 points in total across the season. That in the last sort of in the Pep Guardiola era, so about in the last 10 years, it's probably been a bit more than that, but about 90 points generally to win it. And then to get into Europe and to qualify for the sort of competitions, the continental competitions, that you typically need kind of about 60 plus for that.
Okay.
Down at the bottom, there's the sort of historic benchmark of safe is 40 points. I think only 2 or 3 teams have ever been relegated with more than 40 points. Most teams who go down get somewhere around 30 points. Okay. But 40 is the sort of like, you know, when a team reaches 40 points, particularly a smaller team, that's when they can start to like sort of exhale a little bit and breathe a sigh of relief, because they're probably going to be there next year. So for relegation, so I think that relegation though is, as you say, so that's kind of the points basically. You know, you're looking at those amounts of points roughly will take you around the table. What you'll notice with that is, because with the way that European qualification works, it's slightly different year on year based on lots of things which are quite complicated. So I won't get into all of it, but essentially, usually the top 7 or 8 teams are able to qualify for Europe. So the top 5 usually will go into the Champions League, which is like the top level of European competition. That's where Real Madrid, Barcelona, all those teams that you've heard of, they qualify for that from Spain. And then, you know, the big team, Paris Saint-Germain have won that the last 2 years. These are the teams that I would imagine people who are sort of interested in sports will have heard of, even if they don't really know that much about them.
Real quick. I hate to interrupt. He's referring to, when we talked with Rory about the international competitions. Remember we talked about in the last episode with the financial implications, how you get to compete in multiple international competitions simultaneously with competing in the EPL, and how much more money that is for the players to make if they get into one of those things. He's referring to Champions League, which is essentially, just for the American mind, it's like the top 17, because there's other leagues in the world. Again, this is what's very different between this and the NBA and the NFL. There's other leagues in the world that probably aren't quite as deep as EPL in England, but the top level teams are just as good or better, or just as famous or better than the teams in the EPL. That's where you get Liga, like in Spain and in the Mediterranean, that has, like he said, Barcelona, Real Madrid. You get the Bundesliga in Germany that has classic, extremely strong German teams. And you get, so basically this competition he's referring to called the Champions League is basically, whatever, the top 7, what have you, teams from each one of these leagues all put together in a world competition. It's sort of like, I would call it it's not the World Cup of pro soccer because obviously it's not everyone, but it's all of the best teams in Europe from Ireland all the way over to Greece, all coming together, the best of the best, to see who is really the best. So that's what he's referring to when he's talking about the top teams scoring enough to qualify to be in that league. And it's the tops of the top. Continue.
Yeah. So then, and basically there's the Champions League at the top, and then there's like 2 sort of like similar competitions, but for the teams who come in the next sort of strands, right? Maybe you discussed those before as well. But what that means is that basically everybody who is safe from relegation probably has a shot of sneaking into the. So, we look at the end of the table last year. There's only really the teams who are in like 14th, 15th, right at the end, who've got nothing to play for. Because everyone above them has got a chance of sneaking into these European competitions. And everyone who's below them is worried about relegation, basically. So the season stays pretty active until the end of the year, because everybody's got something to play for. And it like things that don't seem like a big difference, like the difference between 3rd and 4th, that'll affect your seeding in the European competition. So it does make a difference. So and also the prize money is you get more prize money the higher up the league you finish, right? So everybody has something to play for. Relegation though is definitely the be all and end all. So the way that relegation works is the 3 teams with the lowest points are demoted to the lowest league. And I think, you alluded to it there. Basically every football that exists in England is part of this giant thing called the football pyramid. So at the bottom is like things that I've played in, like just essentially park games, but they are like Division 15 or something like that, right? And you could theoretically get promoted all the way up from there, all the way up to the Premier League. And,
let's do it.
Sure,
let's get one together.
Well, basically, this is a British person explaining this to Rob Mack, the Always Sunny guy, is why he bought Wrexham. He bought a team that are in the 5th tier because he was like, that's incredible that I can buy this team in the 5th tier. I don't know what he paid for that team, but probably less than £1 million. And he's able to then take that, and they are very close. They're in the division below now, one below the EPL.
Oh, they made it the champions.
Yeah. So they've been in the championship. They're in the championship last year. And they're in the championship last year, and they're probably one of the favourites to go up this year to the Premier League. And so that's remarkable, right? And they've done that in 6 years, and so you can do it. And I think that's something that's very appealing about sport. The difference in money between the championship, it's not as big as the difference, as you say, between the UFL and the NFL, but you're talking revenues are significantly higher in the Premier League. Probably, I would say, I don't know off the top of my head, but I would say the Championship teams, you're probably looking at a budget of like 10 to 20% the size of a Premier League team. And obviously the problem with that is that a team gets relegated, their outgoings are still the same. They've still got all those players under contract. They've still got all those, they've still got giant stadiums that they need to maintain, and it becomes quite difficult. And there are a few examples over the course of the last sort of 30 years, 40 years, where teams get relegated and then they just completely capitulate because they're broke, basically. And if they don't come up at the first time of asking, so what happens is for the first 3 years after you get relegated, if you don't come back up, is the Premier League pay something called parachute payments. And basically that's just to keep you afloat, because if they didn't, you would basically go bust. Every single team who got relegated would go out of business. And obviously that's not good.
Don't want that.
So the parachute payments, but that makes the league below really, really unfair in favor of the teams who get relegated into it, because, most of those teams who get relegated into it are financially far stronger than everybody else in that division. and they usually retain some of their playing squad from the Premier League, although most players do sort of agitate for a move and leave. But West Ham, for example, who've just gone down, they've managed to keep their best player because he was a boyhood West Ham fan. He's decided to stay. So like that's for them that they have to come up this year because they've got him on a lot of money. And if they don't go up this year, the parachute payments get reduced and they won't be able to function. So essentially when a team goes down, they have to come back up as quickly as possible. And if they don't, that's when things really get wrong. So one of the teams who's been promoted to the Premier League this year, Coventry, they got relegated from the Premier League 25 years ago, I think, 2001. They got relegated from the Premier League and they completely collapsed. They ended up in the fourth tier in League Two. They ended up losing their stadium and they had to go and play 60 miles away in a different city. And then, sort of funny enough, the rugby team who took the stadium off them then went bust, so they've actually got their stadium back now as they've recovered. But so like they're a team who completely fell apart after being relegated. And there's a few examples like that. And you know, we talk about the good stories. So Southampton, who were in the league last year or the year before, Leeds, who are in the league now. These are both teams who massively fell apart financially after relegation, but they've managed to bounce back. Unfortunately, not all of them do, and so there's some teams who are now in the kind of doldrums of the league who were once Premier League teams, and you know, often teams have to swing for the fences to try and stay in the league. But if they do so and it doesn't work out, then it's a financial disaster. So and then coming up, just to sort of slightly correct what you said. So basically, the top two teams from the Championship come up automatically. So this year that was Coventry and Ipswich, but then historically what it was the teams from third to fourth
for the third spot. Tournament. Yeah, that's what it was.
Yeah. But it used to be third to fourth, but they're changing it next year. They're expanding it to third to seventh. Third to sixth. It used to be. They're expanding it to third to eighth for next season. So, which could be interesting. So Hull, who came up, I mean, they're going to be a disaster this year in the Premier League. Like they came up. They don't have any money because they kind of sometimes teams come up when they're not ready to, and they're like financially not ready to. I think that was the case for them. They kind of were a big surprise. Like no one expected them to do anything in the Championship last year. I think they came fifth or sixth, but they managed to get to the final of the tournament.
Real quick. I want to remind everybody listening, or in case you didn't hear our first episode where we talked about this, remember the teams operate off of what money they have. There isn't like a budget or there is revenue sharing, but like there isn't like a salary cap. It's literally you get to spend the money on players or whatever based upon how much money you have. So what you're talking about like a smaller club that has 15% the budget of teams kind of that are in their range in the standings, and they come up to the Premier League. It's that's tough.
Yeah, absolutely, and so and sometimes those teams can kind of become sort of some like teams that when I was a child, when I first started watching football, Bournemouth and Brighton were right at the bottom of the league. They were an afterthought, and next year they'll be in Europe, both of them. So it's quite a big swing from for some of those teams, and it can work out. I would say in both cases they have billionaire owners, but it's very easy to be a Cinderella story with a billionaire owner, I think. But like I think it's so for basically that's it. And for some teams who come up, so Hull, for example, it won't be a financial disaster for them if they get relegated because they will come up and expect to be relegated.
Yeah, that's kind of more of the bracket they're in. Yeah.
And will make business. So Ipswich, for example, they're a similar story, actually. They were in the Premier League in the 90s. They got relegated in the early 2000s. They've been down to League One and kind of come back. But when Ipswich came up last time, they were very shrewd with the players they bought. They bought very young players who would probably be able to win the Championship the following season, but probably wouldn't keep them in the Premier League. But that meant that they couldn't get the Premier League money, they get relegated, but then when they come back up, they're stronger because they've been able to either sell those players or get those players ready to be Premier League level. And so you quite often see some of the well-run teams. So Fulham, for example, who are now a sort of mid-table team, they went up and down like 3 years in a row, came up, got relegated, went down, came back up again, slightly stronger each time. And that's like quite a good business model for those smaller teams. Where relegation is a disaster is for teams that behave as if it's never going to happen to them. And you know, for Tottenham last year, that it was unbelievable that they found themselves. I mean, the thing is, they finished 17th the year before, so 2 years in a row they've been one position above the relegation zone. But it's just chronic mismanagement from that they found themselves in that situation, and you know they're still paying for their giant. I mean, their stadium gets used for NFL games, right? It's a giant new stadium. I think it's about 5-6 years old. They're still, you know, they have an enormous playing staff, playing budget, wage budget for that, and they just through mismanagement really found themselves very close to disaster. As luck would have it for them, West Ham, who are another team who probably wouldn't really consider themselves to be relegation candidates, had a worse season and have ended up below them. But the other two teams were, you know, sort of never likely to kind of they were sort of nowhere near them. But those two teams sort of battling it out, and until the last week of the year, I don't think it was very, you know, last couple of games maybe it wasn't very clear who was going to go down. So a relegation can be a complete and utter disaster for a team, and I think it's for some teams it's a good thing because it can kind of wipe the slate clean and start again. You know, you'll speak to a Newcastle fan, I think, before too long, and you know they've been relegated twice this century, and both times it's sort of they've managed to bounce back without any problems. I wouldn't say they would say it was a good thing for them, but they've kind of managed to hit the reset button with that. I think, unfortunately, for most other teams, for example, Newcastle's big rival Sunderland, it's a complete disaster, and they ended up in the wilderness. They're back in the Premier League now, but they ended up in the wilderness for about 8 or 9 years, I think. So it can be, you know, a real sort of, yeah, it's terrible for some teams, and you know, and they often, as I said with Coventry, they've taken 25 years to come back to the big time, and you know, probably will only last for 1 year in it. So it's yeah.
So imagine that, all of you out there thinking about your college football team or your NFL team, you know, you could in 1 year, if you were at the bottom 3, you get sent to the UFL, you get sent to Division II, and it could take you 25 years, a generation, to get back into the NFL or D1. That's the type of stuff we're talking about. And that's how insane things are, how crucial games are, even at the bottom of the standings, the bottom of the table. You're fighting to survive. And that is so, you know, as we've laid out, there's like 3 different things you're really playing for all through the thing. Obviously, you want to win the championship, but you also want to score enough points to qualify to go into international tournaments. And there's all different levels of it. So you can still qualify for that all throughout the table. You want to score enough points to be invited to one of those so your players can make more money, and so you can build the brand of your team more. And then at the bottom, you're fighting for survival, to not get relegated, to could be disastrous results for your team. Coming up next, we're going to talk about one of those teams where you just don't think it's ever going to happen, and goddamn it, it's not never going to happen. Liverpool is up next. Yeah, that's all for this week, folks, but you heard it right there. Next episode with my man Gareth, we will be talking about Liverpool, and maybe if that's the team that you want to pick to support going forward. We thank you all for joining EPL Passport. This is DAR Sports Media, and the word DAR never stops.